Hello, everyone. Today, I would like to do a book review of a book that fundamentally transformed the way that I viewed the history of the Holocaust and of the Nazis. It's a book that's been around for a while, but it became an instantaneous classic. It is Ordinary Men, Police Battalion 101, and the Final Solution in Poland by Christopher Browning. Browning, I think, is retired now. He's a teacher emeritus. I think he was last at the University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill. This book is incredibly powerful and profound, in part because what Browning was able to do at a time when it was really, really hard to get access to historical primary sources of the Holocaust because of the way that for a while, this isn't the case really anymore, but for a while, Germany tried to prevent historical research being done on the Holocaust. Browning was able to get access to interviews that people in this police battalion gave immediately after the war. So immediately after the war is over, a lot of these police officers who committed crimes, some of them did, they gave interviews, described what they were thinking, all of this stuff, but then it kind of got secluded away in the archives. Browning was able to get access to them. And about the same time as Browning was looking at these interviews, another historian named Andrew Goldhagen looked at almost the same files. It is a fascinating conversation because the two scholars basically come up with very, very different interpretations of what happened in the Final Solution in Poland. Goldhagen, I think his book is called Hitler's Willing Executioners. Goldhagen argues that the men in these police battalions were monsters, that Nazis were monsters, that they were almost inhumane, and that's what allows them to behave the way that they do. Browning, though, argues, as his title suggests, that they're not monsters, that these people are ordinary men. Men just like you and me, who in essence got caught up in committing some really horrible crimes. And Browning documents this. There are a lot of really difficult things to read in this book. Horrible stories of how people were treated. But it is important to read these things so that we can understand and remember and try to prevent things like this from happening in the future. What makes Browning's argument interesting to me is that these were men who did not sign up to be killers when the war began. They were basically policemen. And there are police battalions all throughout Germany that basically you weren't really necessarily at the war front or whatever. You were a cop. You were a policeman. That's what you signed up to do. You weren't the Gestapo. You weren't the SS. You were a policeman. As the war goes on, and as Jewish people and Romanian people and political prisoners and LGBTQ people are rounded up, put into ghettos, and as the war begins to go badly in 1943, the war turns on the Nazis. The Nazis decide that they have to destroy the evidence of their war crimes, and so they begin to try to what they would call liquidate the ghettos and to impose the final solution, if you will, on the so-called Jewish question. And they don't have enough soldiers to do it because they're all fighting and losing in the battlefields on the Eastern and Western fronts. So, the Western Front after 1944. So what the Nazis do is they take these police battalions and they reorg, if you will, to use a corporate term. They change job descriptions, if you will. They take these police battalions and they turn them into what we might call Einsatzgruppen, which I don't speak German, but apparently that translates into a mobile death unit. And these policemen who didn't necessarily sign up for this kind of activity are now charged with it. They go into the ghettos, they round people up, they take them out into the woods, and then they begin to execute them. When I was growing up, a lot of people would argue that people like this, they had to do it because they were ordered to, and if they didn't follow the order, they would suffer the same fate. But what Browning uncovers is that's completely untrue, that there was a choice, that these policemen had choices. They could choose not to participate in the killing, and nothing happened to them. They weren't demoted. They weren't fired. They weren't killed themselves. They were simply sent to go guard the road or guard the vehicles. There are some policemen who didn't participate at all. They wouldn't do so, even though they were ordered to do so. And this then creates a sort of interesting question. Well, if they didn't have to, then why did some of them do it? Now, Andrew Goldhagen argues that they're monsters, and that's what led them, those who committed these crimes. And they killed innocent people, babies, infants, children, mothers, fathers, brothers, sisters, grandparents, everyone. So why did these people who did the killing actually do it when they could have avoided it and nothing would have happened to them? Now, Goldhagen argues that that's because they're monsters. They would go out and they wanted to kill Jews because they were incredibly anti-Semitic, and so they enjoyed it. Their bloodlust for killing Jews is what motivated them. Browning suggests that there may have been some who were like that some people were filled with racist hatred that did that. But when he looks at these interviews and he looks at these files, he finds some other nuance too. Some of these soldiers didn't want to do it, but they did it. They would get drunk the day before, the moments before. They were so drunk they couldn't even shoot straight, so it became a problem because they would wound people, and they would suffer more. And the Nazis saw this as a problem because it wasn't efficient to kill. They after they committed these crimes, they would continue to drown themselves in alcohol. That's to Browning suggests a sort of reluctance. What Browning, I guess, argues is that there are people here who are committing this crime who they're doing it from a somewhere. I suppose there was a degree of people who were kind of anti-Semitic and wanted vengeance on and used their anti-Semitism as an excuse, but others were creating a distorted sense of reality, a distorted sense of morality to try to justify their explanations, and that suggests that they're maybe more ordinary than what Andrew Goldhagen suggests they are. Still, regardless of all of that, one of the questions that still is out there is, so then why did people do it? And Browning then turns to Stanley Milgram's experiments to try to explain the role of authority and pressure, particularly in instances where responsibility is taken away from individuals. Milgram's experiments were really fascinating. Basically, you've probably seen or heard them before, but basically what happens is an individual is brought into a room. There's a man with a doctor and a stethoscope, and he's got this clipboard, and he's an authority, and he says, we're doing an experiment here. There's someone on the other side of the room who has to answer questions, and if they get it wrong, I want you to push a button to shock them. And we're going to see if we can shock them into getting the right answer. Now, the person on the other side was not being shocked. He was in on the experiment, but the person pushing the button wasn't. And so what Milgram did is he would ask the question, the person on the other side of the room would get it wrong, and then the doctor would say, you need to shock them. And lo and behold, the vast majority of people participating in this experiment pushed the button to shock the individual. And when they were reluctant to do so, the doctor would say, it's okay, you're not responsible for this. You're not responsible for this at all. I take full responsibility. Just do it. And every time that the person on the other side of the room got an answer wrong, you would dial up the juice a little bit, a little bit more. So that shocking, now you could hear the person from the other room. Again, they were in on it, but they would vocalize this intense pain and this intense agony that they were experiencing, and the person who was pushing the button to shock them would be reluctant again, but the doctor would say, you are absolved from all responsibility. You will not be held responsible for this. Now, I am the authority. I know what's going on. Will you please push the button? They got the answer wrong. And again, they would do it, and they would do it again and again and again, up to the point where basically this person on the other side, at least the individual pushing the button, believed was near in severe agony and potentially at the point of death. They continued to push the button. When an authority figure takes away or absolves individuals of all responsibility, but then tells them to do that, well, Christopher Browning's Ordinary Men suggests that a lot of people will actually push the button when they believe they're not going to be held accountable. This book is not only a study in what these police battalions had to or committed. It goes to speak about human nature as well. What is our human nature, and what kind of lives do we want for our world to necessarily be absolved of all responsibility, or be absolved of all kinds of authority and just do what authority says? Authority is important for sure, but there can be ways to trick our hardwiring to manipulate people to do things that they know is wrong, particularly if they don't think they're going to be held accountable for it. It's a fascinating book. It's really well written. These police battalions, of course, will eventually be inefficient, and so they'll be done away with, and then the Nazis will move more towards the concentration camp, the death camp process. If you want to know or understand if you have this question of how could something like this have happened in the Second World War, or if you have this question of could something like this happen in America or in Britain or anywhere, I would highly recommend this very excellent history, Christopher Browning's Ordinary Men, Police Battalion 101, and the Final Solution in Poland. Until next time, I'll see you then.